Now, with the current education reforms still currently ongoing in the sector, looking at KBC, the issue of recruitment, training of teachers, deployment of the same, looking at digital learning as well, the loopholes therein and sealing them. This morning, in the next 45 minutes, we'll look at the state of education sector in our country. I'm holding court with Professor Alice Njuguna, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academics, Research and Student Affairs at Zetech University. Karibu to the program, Professor.
Thank you, Doreen.
How are you feeling?
Very fine, thank you.
Very fine, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That's interesting. I just want us to brush this discussion basically from what has been happening, and this is with regards to the A grades. Let's start from that particular point. We're talking about, is it over 984 A's just in one region, 6,400 in the entire country, and from where I sit, I would imagine we should be happy instead of, you know, the uproar within it. In fact, we're even having a section of legislators who are saying that we should prop this matter further, even in Parliament. From where you sit as an educationist, how do you pick this?
Thank you, Doreen. Matters education always get into my heart.
Oh, yeah?
And almost everyone of us is a parent or a sponsor. So maybe that's why we are having such a great debate. And I always say, if you want to lie, lie with numbers. Because the numbers just don't add up what is going out in the public.
Okay.
But if you read the report from the CS when it was releasing the results, we have 1,146 A's countrywide. They're not in the thousands. A minus, we have 6,407. So in total in the country, we had 7,553 A and A minus. That's a very small number.
So it's even above the 64 that we're even talking about.
That's a small number, considering that we had 876,000 students who sat for KCSE. And this translates to about 0.13% of the total population. Actually, it is down from last year's, which was 0.14%. So if we really looked at the numbers, we would say that, to me, they are not out of proportion, they are not enormous, considering that also the number of KCSE candidates went up. Last year we had 826,000. This year we have 856,000. And who doesn't want their child to get an A?
Let's just be truthful.
Who doesn't want their child to get an A? And the truth be told, we were also given the distribution of the A's across the country, and the A's basically came from the national schools. The bigger number of A's came from the national schools, Doreen. Mangu had 80, I think Alliance High had about 72. That's already 150. And if you look at a school like Mangu, it has children from all over the country. Children who got 430, 440, 420 marks, over 400 marks from all over the country. So transforming them into an A is not that. It's not a big deal, actually, and the teachers are able to do it. As far as the distribution across the country is concerned, I'm a trained teacher.
Yes.
I believe that I teaching at Nyambari High School and someone teaching at Alliance High School, we both went to Kenyatta University or Egerton University. We went through a B.Ed curriculum. So what the teacher at Alliance can teach, I can teach. So if you give me a child with 380, whether they go to Alliance or they go to Nyambaria or they go to Nyandaro High, as a good teacher, I can actually be able to transform them. So for me, I'm not so much worried about the number of A's. I think the number is standard. What I would really want to see is a situation where we celebrate success.
Yes.
Because with the kind of onslaught that we have seen this year, it's like you don't deserve to get an A, you got an A. If you don't celebrate the success, we're telling our young people, don't work hard enough. So I would really want a situation where we celebrate success as much as we also want to look at how to bring up the others. But if we don't demonize the A's, who will want to get them?
And I hear you, and you're really making a very good point there with regards to let's celebrate success. Because truth be told, in whatever capacity, who does not want success? But again, you just said that this was even just a slight drop from what was last year. But again, why would there be such an uproar? What is happening in this education space that would really so much talk about it? And when you juxtapose, you realize it's not even like an increase. In fact, it's a decrease from what was in the previous year. Why is this?
Well, I would say one factor, probably there was a change of regime
Okay.
So people actually expected something different. People were waiting to see what would the late Professor George Magua, what would he have done? And we had a new CS here. So I think that was expected, that people would be watching to see what would exactly happen. But let's wait and see how the trend goes up in the future.
I hear you.
Yes.
You talked about 686,000 in the concluded KCSE. We're talking about 490,000 who scored D+ and above. Let's flip the coin away from the top scorers, and sometimes you realize there's less focus or less talk about the students who scored that mark that is on the threshold of the university, as it is, or as how our system of education is structured. What more do we need to do from where you sit in regards to just make sure there's inclusivity even for the students?
Now that's where rubber meets the road. Actually, that should be our focus rather than the A's. The A's will get their engineering, their law, their computer science. But these young ones who will not meet the minimum cut for a diploma, because most people will take diploma from C-. That's why we talk about the D+. Where do they go?
Yes.
Are they skilled enough? Did they waste their time in school? I don't think so. The way the education system is currently structured, there is a cake for everybody. There is what we call the Kenya National Qualification Authority, and they have a framework that allows a child with as low as E to work their way up to a PhD. You start with artisan. With a grade as a D-, you can start from your artisan level. You move to certificate. You move to diploma, you move to degree, and whatever other level that you're actually interested in. And what is lacking, Doreen, is public awareness of what that child can do. I work at Zetech University. I have seen these kids come with C-, and we start them from the TVET level. For example, they'll do a certificate in food and beverage, they'll do a certificate in electrical wiring, and by the time they finish, they have some skills, and they can start working. They can sponsor themselves to certificate level. They can sponsor themselves to diploma. And they're actually able to do that with the proper guidance. The only difference is that it takes you longer to get to your degree if you started from certificate. And many of them, for example, the ones who do certificate in food and beverage, by the time they finish their diploma, they're employed by the big hotels, locally and globally. I know several who are even in Dubai. So they don't even want to do that degree finally because they have the skills. So if we got more public awareness on what is this progression, how does the children join the university? Because we need to tell them, you got a D+, you're not a failure. You are just able, I would say, differently. You didn't get an A like the kid who's going to do engineering. But remember, that engineer cannot work unless they have a technician. You have the story about engineers who cannot even fix a light bulb. Who fixes the light bulb?
The technician.
When the engineer does the drawing, who does the implementation? Who does the rollout? The technician, who probably started with a C-. So we need to actually tell these kids, you're useful, you actually have a career, and you have a place in society. Yes.
So then, Professor, how do we begin by instilling or creating this awareness? Because you did just touch on that what is also lacking is the awareness that you can do more. There's more beyond this D+ grade. And over time, when you look at even the results release, those of D+ and below, they always top in the list regards to the numbers. There are many compared to the C+ and above. So at what point or how do we start? Because also you realize there's a lot of focus on the top end courses. You just did mention the engineering, the law, and this tendency of if I don't do that, then there's basically nothing I've done with my life. Where do we start from?
That's very right, Doreen. From my experience, and because I've been in the education sector for many years, most of these A's don't even end up in Kenya. They would join Wings to Fly and other programs, and they find themselves outside the country. So those ones, the ones we have had the hulabaloo about them, I have seen the media trying to track where they go. It is the D+ and the C+ who remain with us. A few years ago, maybe in the 80s and the 70s, the village polytechnic was something that was to be looked up to. If your child did not make it to the A levels, for example, they would join the local village polytechnic. You probably know the sigalagalas and all that, and they would do masonry, they would do plumbing and a lot of other things. And these people are now big shots in the market. What surprises me is that they now don't want their own children to go back and start from that particular level. So the rain started beating us when we started seeing the village polytechnic as a place for failures, as a place that is ignored, a place where you dump the kids who don't do it in place. But the government has come up with TVET. And what we need to start having is awareness, both to the students and to the parents, that you can actually build your way up from the TVET. So the media, the educators need to start telling the children, don't always aim to join the degree. I know many people, for example, in my year when I did my KCP, I was in the first 844. I know several of my friends who never went to the university and had passed, and their parents said, no, go and do CPA. CPA to me is at that level. You may call it professional, but it's at a tertiary level, but not at university level. They went and studied, and they're making it in life. Their parents were already aware that sometimes it is better to take this child to a middle level college, and then they join the university a little bit later. So do our parents know? Do our teachers know? And when we start from that particular level, and I'm glad CBC is coming up.
Yes.
Do our teachers know that we don't always have to push them to go to the university? They can start from the bottom. And you know that, Doreen, some of those people, by the time they graduate with a degree, they have 3 qualifications. I have a certificate, I have a diploma, and I have a degree. When you only have a degree, and the difference could just be 1 year. So the awareness.
And you usually don't see that in that format.
We don't see it that way. The positive acclamation that you can actually make it even if you don't join the university at the onset is what we need. All of us are stakeholders.
So then, do you think it was a wrong move to transform some of the polytechnics that were to universities? Take a case in point, even the Kenya Polytechnic, now the Technical University of Kenya, because we are talking about how we can start from that position and continue scaling upwards. And you've really given good examples, even just from your own experience here and there. So was that a good move?
Well, I'd say it was a knee-jerk reaction because I was at that point in time when every Kenyan believed that they needed to get a degree.
Yeah, and actually to just be in a university.
Yes. But if you note, there is a whole reversal. We are putting more money in the TVETs. There is a department in the Ministry of Education specifically concerned with the TVET, and even now the universities themselves have a TVET wing, including Zetech and many other universities that I know, even the public ones, they have a TVET wing. So we are actually saying, okay, we made that decision, but we need to go back and look at where we are coming from. Yes.
You've also, one of your achievements that I looked at is development of many curriculum from diploma to PhD. In this development of curriculum, how are you making sure, or even from where you sit, that there is proper inclusivity of all? Why I ask this is that over time we have looked at the transition of education from lower classes to primary to secondary to higher learning, and we always look at this with the aim of, I want to get to the job market, and not just any job market, sit in an office, a white-collar job. So even in this development of curriculum, in what way is it inclusive to cater for anyone and everyone with the skills that they have?
Thank you, Doreen. If you look at the Singapore model and other models of curriculum development, that's what we adopt. For example, at Zetech University, when you make a curriculum, you ask yourself, what next? Is there progression? If I finish my certificate, would I join the diploma? And are the two related? If I finish my diploma, can I join the degree? And when I join the degree, do I have to start from the beginning and start repeating the courses? So you make the curriculum and stagger it so that the student can move from one level to the other one seamlessly.
All right, moving from one level to the other seamlessly. How has this been working? Because again, you realize there's a lot of concern and complaints in regards to the graduates with CHAN, whether they just did direct entry to degree programs or they moved from certificate to diploma to degree or diploma to degree. There's really a big concern on the kind of graduates that our institutions churn out.
Yeah, I probably have heard the story about half-baked graduates.
Exactly.
And when you make your curriculum, you need to look at the outcomes. In other countries, as we call it, competence-based. In other countries, they call it outcome-based. And you have to ask yourself, what would this graduate be doing in the market? Because I really don't believe that our graduates are half-baked.
So this is a preserve of this student, or is a preserve of the teachers and lecturer, or it's holistic? Where does this lie?
It is holistic.
It's holistic.
All of us. So when you make your curriculum, you have to look at what we call the 21st century skills.
Okay.
Because what you call half-baked doesn't mean that a kid can't actually do the job they're supposed to do. They probably lack a few things like communication skills, they like media skills, they lack innovation, they like critical thinking. So if you make your curriculum and you infuse some of those skills, you're likely to find a graduate who hits the market running.
Yes. And that's the point and bit that we have been missing, infusing all these skills. So then where do we start from? Because if we don't do this, you again realize, we always keep saying that. Whether it's CBC, because they will still go to higher learning. We'll say, yeah, they did the competency, but they're still not fit for the job market. So where exactly do we start from, Professor? How do we begin to just sort of like make a change and a difference in the system? So then we don't really keep complaining about the same thing 10 years later, 20 years later. Learning doesn't stop just because you keep saying we are half-baked.
I'd look at it from teacher education.
All right.
Teacher education. Who is teaching our students? Which curriculum are they meeting at their schools of education, either in a TTC or in a university? Do they themselves know what they're actually going to roll out? And then, of course, then we need to go now to the classroom and find out who are our students.
Yeah.
What are their abilities? Because if you look at subjects, and by the way, and people don't actually know that, for example, in mathematics, we have mathematics alternative A and alternative B.
What is the difference?
That is already meant to take care of students from very difficult environments.
All right.
Students from very difficult environments are likely to do alternative B because maybe they have interruption in their study, like the nomads and the likes. Those who do alternative A are likely to end up being the engineers and the likes. That already takes care of the differences in the student, and the teacher is taught to differentiate the two. If I'm teaching alternative A, I will teach the students in this way. If I'm teaching alternative B, I'll teach them in this way. So if you started with the teacher being aware and the students being aware, and also the market, because the market needs to realize that we also have a responsibility. When you buy a knife, Doreen, do you use it immediately?
No.
You always have to sharpen it. I mean,
and also just read the manual.
Read the manual, sharpen it. So when you employ me, you also need to understand where is this person coming from, and then you are able to tailor me to your job market. But I can tell you, the students we normally produce from the universities have the skills. If the stakeholders worked together, they would be able to engage them very well in the market.
I'm really finding this is a sharp disconnect. And perhaps I'd want you to elucidate just a bit further for proper understanding and context. Because from an education's perspective, and as an educationist, you say that these graduates or these learners from higher learning, they always are up to par. Their abilities are tick. Their skills are okay. You just did mention a few things here and there, which if twitched and tweaked, they'll then be good to go. But again, you meet the employer on the job market and they would say, they just did give the papers. There's no skill set. There's nothing. That's why sometimes you get some employers who say, I'm giving you a platform. You grow, and then I will pay you later. And then the graduates would say, but I have my papers. I'm good enough. So what is this contrast? Who's fooling who? Or what more or excess or extra do we need to just do so that then we bridge this gap?
Best practice is that when we make curriculum, we don't sit in our small professors' offices and just say, I want to come up with a legal curriculum or a computer science curriculum. You benchmark with global practices and with professional bodies. For example, if you're making a curriculum for computing, I'll look at the Institute of Engineers. I will look at the Association of Computing Machinery. I'll look at international bodies and see what is actually trending. What are the top ICT skills, for example. And as I make the curriculum, I will call in the industry. It's actually a requirement by the Commission for University Education in our country that before you actually release a curriculum for inspection, you have involved stakeholders. The people in the computer science industry will come and look at my curriculum and tell me, have you put all the skills that are actually required as stakeholders? I will call in employers. I will call in ICT directors, I will call in HR experts, and I will tell them, come have a review at this curriculum. Are these the skills that you are looking for? And they normally give us very useful feedback. And if that is followed throughout, if you actually take a very seriously stakeholder engagement, you come up with a curriculum that is fit for the market. But you also note that things change very rapidly. Like, for example, in the field of computer science, the evolution, obsolescence is very fast. So you also have to keep on reviewing the curriculum to find out what has changed in the market and what do I want to add. I believe that if all these stakeholders come together, that would be a debate of the past.
That's why I really get you when you say that this is a holistic approach. It's not just one entity saying that, you know, for you as a learner, make sure you do this, but also for you as a teacher, make sure when you're going for training, you really understand what exactly, you know, this entails. So I really understand when you talked about that. But again, you did mention on abilities and skill set, and this just orients my next question, because again, there's been a proposal that even as learners exit the secondary school and they're moving to higher learning institutions, as opposed to just sticking on the grade that this learner got, how about then we do entry-level exams to ascertain the skill set of this learner, so that if they want to do sociology, then they have sort of like a skill directed towards that. If they want to do psychology, if they want to do engineering, if they want to do law, they want to do journalism. So then you just don't say because they got a B, let them go do journalism. They got an A, let them go do engineering. Then midway you realize, yes, you got an A, but it's not really what you are skilled to do, even as a person. Is this a good proposal? Should we be thinking in that direction?
Two things, Doreen, I agree with you, that our exams are very terminal, that sometimes you might just, a stroke of luck, you might find yourself with an A. Do you now decide, I am going to do
just a stroke of luck.
Medicine? And of course, there are changes in the curriculum that are now saying it is not longer summative, it is going to be formative assessment. And I also don't think that we need to wait until the student gets an A for us to carry out that assessment, because that would be a little tad too late. The Ministry of Education did introduce Office of Career Services at all universities. And all universities all high schools do career counseling. I believe that it is at this level that we should be trying to move the child towards the subject that they can actually do. By the time they're in Form 2, you should have started seeing, although they're good in math, they're better off in woodwork. Although they're good in math, they probably would do better in home science, or they probably do better in agriculture. So we do that throughout, so that by the time the child is reaching Form 4, they have already almost decided that I can actually, even if I get an A, I'll go into law. I don't have to do medicine. Even if I get an A, I can go into commerce.
So you start this early enough.
Exactly.
Even at primary level.
At primary level.
Even at grade 6. Now you're talking about grades and all. You start that at primary level. So it's a good proposal, but the starting point is what we need to look into. So then it's not just after Form 4 and then you realize, let's test you on psychology and see if you're best fit for this. We start as early as enough. What might this take? Because I'm looking at a point where we can really reform the education sector. Some of these things you're talking about, just as you said, if we looked into these things, there will be a thing of the past. How do we start having these conversations based on this proposal, for instance?
I think we're moving in the right direction.
We are?
Especially with the CBC.
Okay.
Because when you say that this kid exceeds expectations in mathematics, or meets expectations in language, you're already starting to see where this child is likely to end up. So we need to embrace change, and as early, before the kid actually reaches the junior secondary, before they do their grade 6 exams, we should already have started seeing where they are headed. And I think the new curriculum is geared towards that.
Okay.
Yes.
So we can laud the new curriculum in that regard.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that momentarily. But also, just heading the crisis management and transition from face-to-face to online learning during COVID-19. And I was telling you earlier how during COVID we really did experience that sharp divide in our education sector. And we just did see how much there's a lot we need to do as far as digital learning is concerned. Much as you looked into this transition from face-to-face, from where you sit again, Professor, how would you rate where we are as a country as far as education is concerned, this tied with digitization or digital learning altogether?
Okay, Doreen, I would say we've made some milestones, but we have a lot of work to do.
Okay.
Because when COVID came to us, many of us were not even ready. We were still waiting for the free laptop scheme to work. So many kids at primary school, at secondary school, even at the university, did not have devices to be able to move on to digital learning. Some people had never used a video conference application. Majority of us had never really used one.
Zoom was just starting at that point.
Zoom was just starting, and it was basically used for commercial purposes. And it is not something, because we would say it consumed a lot of our bundles. We really need to ask ourselves, where do we start? In the computing curriculum in primary school, the kids should already be prepared to learn online, because they already learn online. And by then, Doreen, digital education, the use of digital media in education did start. I remember in 1973, I remember in 1978, in 1983, radio broadcasts, and basically they were run by KBC. Radio broadcasts were common for education. I remember in class 2,
the radio lessons,
well, there is not digital. That's already digital, right?
Because it wasn't like a one-on-one class.
Yeah, we didn't see the teacher. We listened and we understood and we took notes. Basically, what we're having is an advancement of the same. And technology has evolved such that even with your simple phone, so long as it is internet ready, you can actually be able to run a class, you can be able to study. What we need to look at is the government provision of such services to schools that are disadvantaged. Do the kids have access to bandwidth? Is there fiber connectivity in some of the remote schools? And I know there are a lot of efforts that are being done by both NGOs and the government to ensure that those kids get access to the same. Because what I saw was a sudden makeover, trying to make sure that learning continues in many organizations. But for us at Zetech, fortunately, we had already introduced online learning. So it was as simply as converting the few courses that were remaining to have the students learn. But the truth be told, what happens after COVID? Slowly we start going back to our own original way. So it has to be something that we all agree that a student can learn online. A meeting can be held online, because the future of the job market is online. I don't remember the last time I walked into a banking hall.
It's all mobile money.
And you know, there's always this fear that online learning would get rid of the teacher, and there is nothing like that. The teacher goes nowhere. The teacher is a curriculum developer, the teacher is the implementer, the teacher is the one who looks at the material, the teacher is basically the one who marks. All you need to is to enrich the teacher and enrich the students so that we can all be able to participate.
Plus the online learning, you won't learn by yourself regardless. The teacher definitely will facilitate.
Exactly.
But you did say there's a lot of work. Yes, you said we've made milestones, but still there's a lot we need to do. And it also puts me a bit in a conflict, because when you look at the efforts, you just did touch on the laptop projects, maybe it veered off and we may not touch on it for this particular conversation. But again, just also looking at what this regime is doing. Their first public holiday that it did oversee was dubbed Digital Economy. It's all about the digitization, space and stage. You've heard and seen the CSICT Eli Dowalo rolling out public Wi-Fi hotspots. In fact, he's doing this almost on a regular basis. We've talked about the digital superhighway. The cabinet did give it a green light, go ahead. Yesterday, the president did chair the first paperless cabinet meeting. So it's all about digitization. Looking at the efforts that even the state is making, but then again, when it comes to the thing itself, that's when you actually realize there's a sharp divide. Where are we missing the mark? Because when you look at the efforts, even from face value, there's really quite a lot that is being done, you could say. But again, you come down to the ground and you realize there's still a lot that we need to be doing. Where are we missing the mark, Professor?
If you want it to work, take it to school.
Take it to school.
There's nothing as frustrating as seeing a 40-year-old scrambling with their tablet looking for the icon. And they can't even start an application.
All right.
Suppose that person was taught computing right from high school. Not computing as we know it, as we imagine it is always programming, how to use the devices. Suppose we introduced it in school. Suppose we made it an effort to say that in every classroom, we'll remove the chalkboard and introduce a smartboard. Suppose we say that every application to school will be done online, and therefore ensure that every school has access to the resources. Suppose we say that some of the examinations at primary level, at secondary level, will be done online. So that by the time this child is hitting the market as an adult, the skills are part of them. Just like language. We know that the language of business in Kenya is either Kiswahili or English. Do we start teaching Kiswahili and English after school?
Definitely not.
We teach it in school and we make it mandatory. So that by the time you leave, it's part of your life. It's in your DNA. So for me, I would take it back to school. I would revisit the issue of the laptops and teacher education as far as IT is concerned, and ensure that we are actually teaching actual competencies, not the theory of computing, but actual use of digital media.
What about these trainings, even to teachers? Because just did mention, it disturbs you when you see a 40-year-old or a 50, the iPad is there and you can't even really get where the icon is. So you want this learner to even learn using the digital platforms, but also are our teachers trained enough to handle such? Where are we in regards to that?
The training is supposed to be continuous, not that one module you did at the university, Doreen, called Introduction to ICT.
Because I think that's where it is currently, just on the module that a teacher did.
And that is the end of the story. It's supposed to be continuous, and I always say that every unit we do, there should be some IT element. If I am teaching mathematics, I will teach these kids how to key in the functions, mathematical functions on their laptop. Every unit, if you teach communication, let there be a digital element. If you teach sociology, let there be a digital element, so that it is not just a theory unit. It is something that will actually help you to get the competencies in every field that you do. You know that, for example, if you go abroad, there are places where there are no waiters. You order the meals via robot, and there's a screen in front of you. If you can't even find your way, how do you do that? So we really need to ensure that it is something continuous that we train throughout, not one module. Yes.
How do we work then on the issue of affordability? It's also coming out as one of the biggest impediments, I should say. You just did say that sometimes one would imagine, should I be going on this online platform to study X, Y, Z? The cost of bundles could be expensive. So then, much as we're looking at launching public Wi-Fi hotspots, and this is good for business, but even as we try to incorporate the education sector in all of this, how would we look into making the cost of internet affordable, so that even when we look at digital learning, it's actually accessible, even that child who's down there in Turkana, Marsabit, Samburu?
One of the things that probably as educators we'll be looking at is the tax regime.
All right.
For digital devices or for educational purposes. If you're able to zero rate products that go to places that provide essential services, we believe that we should look at taxation for Wi-Fi for schools. I saw we are now taxing telecommunications and video conferencing. It is something that probably the policymakers and educators need to sit together and ask ourselves, how do we make this affordable? Because this is now becoming an essential service. Doreen, if you're able to provide vaccination free, polio and the likes, for me, I believe that digital skills are almost at that level. That education services that lead towards a better graduate should basically be zero rated.
I hear you.
Yes.
And definitely there's a lot that we need to be talking about. We'll come back to also look into the issue of CBC. But for now, I want us to cross over to Mombasa County, where our very own Kamche Menza is live there. We are looking at the state of the region addressed by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, that is IGAD. Kamche, what more do we know from your end?
Well, good morning to you back in studio, Doreen Aranga. Like you said, we are here in Mombasa, specifically at White Sands, where today the country is hosting leaders from 8 countries that are member states of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, specifically known as IGAD. And this is the 3rd annual address state of the region by the Executive Secretary, Dr. It is happening in Mombasa. Like I told you, this is the 3rd one. And should I say, funny enough or lucky enough, as Kenya, this is the 3rd one we are hosting in the country, and it is happening in Mombasa. There have been 2 others, and this is the 3rd one, and it is happening in Kenya and specifically in Mombasa. So today at around 10, we will be having a State of the Region address by the Executive Secretary of IGAD, that is Dr. Woknegebeyehu. But right now, I'm joined by the spokesperson to the Executive Secretary of IGAD. This is Dr. Nur Mohammed. Welcome. Maybe you could start us off by telling us what exactly is this event usually about?
Thank you so much. Actually, the KBC has been covering our events. This is the initiative of the Executive Secretary, the new executive. Well, he's no longer new, but since he took over, he initiated this very important State of the Union address, which is basically being transparent and accountable to the citizens and the IGAD policy organs. IGAD has 3 policy organs. There's the Committee of Ambassadors, the Council of Ministers, and the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. So essentially what he does is he takes stock of what IGAD has been doing throughout the year in terms of mandate areas, which is peace and security, health, economic integration, and issues around climate, countering terrorism, what the organization is doing in terms of harmonizing member states' policies to respond to these events, and then also lay the reform agenda that he's undertaking for the organization, but with regional policy in mind. And this organization is made up of 8 member states, and so the Assembly of Heads of States comes from all these 8 member states. And the member states, Kenya is a very important member state of IGAD.
Maybe who do we expect here today?
So today we have all the ambassadors from member states who are accredited to IGAD. IGAD staff, the directors of IGAD, and also he's taking the opportunity to launch the Council of Eminent Personalities, 3 from each member state. And the Council of Eminent Personalities basically will act in an advisory role to the Executive Secretary and to IGAD, and linking the organization with the communities. And these are eminent personalities. They come from academia, from conflict resolution, from diplomacy, and they will enrich the work of the organization.
Like you said, there are a number of issues that this particular coming together usually looks to address, issues on security, peace, and all that. Can we talk about the achievements 3 years down the line? What are the achievements that IGAD has so far been able to gain in addressing issues that are affecting countries that are member states?
Thank you so much. So as you know that, the region, we face so many challenges, whether it's climate, whether it is peace and security, health. So let me just start with peace and security. The Ethiopia conflict situation, IGAD was very instrumental in brokering that peace agreement that was signed in Pretoria, and we worked very closely with the leadership of IGAD. So President Kenyatta of Kenya was involved, former president, but even when he was president, he took keen interest and he worked with other leaders, and IGAD worked closely with the African Union to ensure that, a peace agreement, a political agreement is reached. The Ethiopia-South Sudan border issue, that also IGAD ensured that, the two leaders from the two countries meet, and the meeting took place in Nairobi on the sidelines of the IGAD extraordinary summit. South Sudan, the peace agreement, the 20 peace agreement, was actually also shepherded by IGAD, and we are the ones now monitoring to ensure that it's smoothly implemented. The transition in Sudan between the civilian and the military, IGAD is working towards, ensuring that there is a civilian administration in Sudan. So there is that. And then on the issue of climate, IGAD has represented the region at COP26 in Glasgow, at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, to make sure that, the region puts in place measures that mitigate from climate crisis, investment in adaptation, etc. And we have a fully fledged state-of-the-art climate facility based in Ngong in Kenya. And then, of course, COVID, we are the first regional organization to come up with a strategy to deal with the COVID pandemic.
I'm trying to be also careful not to preempt what the Executive Secretary will be talking in his State of the Region address. But you spoke about climate change, and we understand there is a severe drought in most parts of the region. Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, these are parts that are facing severe drought. Has IGAD, or what has been the role of IGAD in trying to help these particular member states?
Thank you. As you know, IGAD was set up in 1986 to deal with the issue of drought and desertification. So our key mandate area was actually the issue of drought and desertification. So we've convened a number of ministerial meetings to ensure that, one, member states address drought and the issue of food insecurity with their own resources, have put up an early warning system and early action system. Number two, we work very closely with our partners to ensure that, there is immediate humanitarian response. But we don't want just to deal with humanitarian response. Some of these issues are related to conflict, so we have to ensure that, conflict, people are not displaced as a result of conflict. We also ensure that, there have to be development responses. We make sure that, there is investment, sufficient investment in livelihood programs. But by and large, we harmonize member states' policies to ensure that, we deal with this climate vagaries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nur Mohammed. He is the spokesperson to the Executive Secretary of IGAD. And in about how long? In about 27 minutes, the Executive Secretary for IGAD, that is Dr. Woknegebeye, who will be making the State of the Region address here in Mombasa, will be, walking into the conference room. We are right outside the conference room. And of course, there are a number of issues that have been mentioned. We were likely to probably hear most of those issues in that particular address. And KBC will be airing this whole event live. The State of the Region address will be aired on KBC Live from 10. So perhaps to the viewer, just to inform you that you can keep it KBC, of course, course, to understand basically what is happening and what has been addressed in the 8 countries that are member states for the IGAD. Back to you in studio, Doreen Arange.
Right, and definitely the minute we get that link and that address there, we'll definitely be heading over there to just get bits and pieces of how that will be unfolding. But that has been our very own country.
Will also have to prove they've mastered a minimum level of French, the first time any formal language tests have been required for residency. The proposal also includes measures to encourage amnesty for undocumented migrants working in sectors under pressure, like restaurant workers, hotels and construction. If they've lived in France for a minimum of 3 years and work in an industry experiencing a labour shortage.
Focus to what we were discussing, state of education. And before we go to CBC, Professor, I want you to quickly, as you were touching on the issue of affordability, of connectivity, and I was just saying how this could also be easy and make it easy for that student who's in Turkana, Samburu, Marsabit, those far-flung areas, then what more would we need to do, and what recommendations would you be having moving forward?
Thank you, Doreen. And I think the government already had it in place.
All right.
It needed a little bit of tweaking. The free laptop per child, instead of having every child carry their laptop with them, just have them in the school so that they can be shared and the child doesn't have to go home with it.
Yeah.
So for me, that would work. And also, that is one. Also, as we work towards a local industry, I still believe, Doreen, that our own technical staff are able to come up with our own locally affordable laptops. And that would really help our children be able to access. And also, that many of the phones that are coming in today are internet ready. They can actually be tweaked for educational purposes, so long as we have the right applications and we have the right software and we have trained the right support teams, and that would make it much cheaper. However, there is a danger, because I hear that the cost of power might go up, so we are also hoping that we'll be able to tweak the same to be able to use solar, because we have a lot of sun. Like now in Nairobi, the sun has basically come down.
So we could leverage on that.
Leverage on solar.
So I hear that there's indeed, the plan is in the offing and it's good enough, but ideally also there's a bit of here and there we need to be doing to be sealing the loopholes. And it won't be justice to exit this conversation without talking about CBC. Why? Because you'd realize also a lot in our discussion we've touched on ability, skill base, and this is what CBC is ideally all about. So then, is this indeed what we have been needing all this while in the education sector to make our education as a country what it needs to be?
Thank you, Doreen. You've just hit it on the head. That's what we've been needed. And I think the origin of 844 was supposed to be outcome-based. I remember
that was the idea.
That was the idea. But in any other name, Rose by any other name would smell the same. That was the original idea, that the students come out with outcomes that can actually be seen, something tangible. And it is already there in the technical subjects. If those kids who do music in high school would tell you there's very little theory. You have to learn how to play an instrument, you have to compose the skill. That is already outcome-based. That is already competence-based. The kids who do home science would tell you, you have to make an apron, you have to cook a meal, you have to do everything. If you're doing woodwork, you have to come up with a bench. If you're doing electrical sciences, you have to do a connectivity. So it's already there, but it was at a much smaller scale, because we'd focus more on the examinations. We focused more on the theory and passing exams, and we didn't really see those kids as that. So CBC came in to ensure that this is actually entrenched in all that we teach at the primary level. If you have a kid in primary and you had the parents complaining, they actually do actual things. I've heard in Japan they actually come up with the phones and watches and the likes. Maybe that's what we need to ask ourselves. Instead of coming up with a carton mannequin, can we come up with a real one? And that's also a factor of Vision 2030, industrialization. Can we actually have these kids make these things in school if we provide the material? I think this is what we need. That will bridge the gap between what you're calling earlier the half-baked. A kid who cannot fix a bulb, a kid who can't even write a memo and they're coming in as a communication specialist, a kid who can't manage a camera, and then they have done a media course, a child who can't even connect a microscope and they're walking into the medical lab. CBC is supposed to bridge that. And I believe from what I have heard with those kids, parents with kids in school, those kids are actually doing something that really brings out what they can do with their hands and their motor skills and their intelligence.
I'm reading a lot of training. It's good enough you're saying that this is actually what we need, more like the silver bullet in our education sector. But also from what you're saying, I'm reading a lot of training and also emanating from the teacher side. We were talking about the recruitment of 30,000+ class teachers, and this was supposed to go and bridge that gap, particularly when it came to grade 7 learners. The proposal was to be having one teacher at least in every school. I was just telling you that as of yesterday, there are already complaints that yes, schools opened on Monday, and this is particularly for the grade 7 learners, but even as we speak, in some public schools, teachers are not yet there. Deployment is really taking place in a slow pace. And so then one would wonder, if this was 6 years to prepare for this that would cause a silver bullet in our education sector, where did we miss it? Because now who's really suffering the most? Is that grade 7 learner, for instance? Or if at all you are to borrow teachers from the previous grades to come and bridge this gap, then you're creating a deficit in where we are borrowing from.
Doreen, you're right. This is where we went wrong. When you start something with education, you're supposed to go through the full cycle. You're supposed to forecast that up to the end, carry out your what-if analysis. So when this child enters grade 1, they will do exams for grade 6 in the year 2022. They will be moving to the next level in the year 2026, up to the university level. I think here we had the right motive, but we started right from the beginning, but we did not look at what would happen next. That's why we had to do the knee-jerk and say, now they're going to remain in the primary schools. So we need to actually now sit down and not wait for 2026 to now say, oh, they finished grade 9. What next? Are they going to remain the same secondary school, the same primary school? Do we have labs and the likes? So I trust that the education policymakers will now sit right now and look at it, and look at the training. Right now, at Zetech, we have already started the university, training the university lecturers, because those kids will finally find us. But it needs to be a concerted effort so that the next batch, it's a feeder.
But it
the
looks
next
like
batch
this is
waiting
happening
for
mostly in private institutions, because even when you talked about online, I could relate. Just being in the private institution, you realize, even with the advent of COVID, like online learning wasn't really quite disrupted. You just said that even in the institution and being a private institution, that training has already begun, because whether you like it or not, this grade, after grade 9, they'll definitely come to the, actually after grade 9, then 10, 11, 12, they definitely go to higher learning. So then, where does it leave public institutions with all this? Because also, the majority would end up in public institutions.
Doreen, I think if there are any lessons we've learned over the last couple of months, when there was a sudden public participation, where do you want the kids to do? I believe that the CS should be able to convene the body that was composed by the president, and now they start looking at the next level. Because you cannot train teachers in 3 weeks. And they are really competent enough. It is something we really need to look at, because I note that it is not only the teachers that we don't have the labs. We don't have the material. The parents are complaining. Some are still looking for schools. So we need to come back and look at it wholesomely, without looking at whether it is public or private, and ask ourselves, where will these children go? Yes.
Because again, also there was another issue of capitation, and you are saying that this is given to public, public schools, and the private institutions are complaining. So then where does this leave us? But then, just as you said, it needs to be holistic, so that then we don't demarcate and say for public could be difficult, or for private is easier, or then we are giving public more and leaving out the private institution. So then training is definitely important. But also, when you look at this new curriculum, there's a lot of involvement even from the parent than the previous curriculum. Look at the CP, look at the the 844, I should say. So different. So even as we talk about training, there's sometimes that idea to focus so much on the teacher training, but the teacher would say in the book, with the help of a parent, where are we leaving the parent as far as training is concerned in this new curriculum, and looking at the holistic education reforms in the country?
To be honest, Doreen, I think we'd left out the training of students fully to the teachers, and forgotten that the mother is the first teacher and the father. They're the first teachers. So they probably will not need training, but they will need counseling. They need some mentorship. They need to be involved so that they know that they have a part to play in the education of the learner. And kids are very happy doing homework with dad these days, Doreen. Kids are very happy cooking with mom, who was never available before that. So for me, this will create a society that is more cohesive. So we need to engage the teachers, the parents, right from the time they start bringing their kids to PP1, so that they know that they will have to walk the journey with the students. And I am glad that the CS is talking about the school hours, for example, and saying that learning must end at 3:35 p.m. That gives the time for the child to play and go home early, and probably get to interact with the parent. Of course, I understand parents are busy, and some of us go home very late, but you'll have to make part, you'll have to really create time. I believe that the teacher teaches my child arithmetic. It is me to teach my child how to say thank you, how to say excuse me. It is me to give my child room for the practicals. Like if they taught hygiene, they were taught hygiene in CBC. the following morning they'll be brushing their teeth. I should be there to supervise. The teacher may not necessarily be there. So all of us have to give. There's a sacrifice that we'll have to give if the children of this nation are to be really molded into what we're looking for.
I hear you. So then you're saying this is not really necessarily training as is, but counseling, mentorship, understanding what they need to be doing as a parents, and not feeling like this is a hefty and a heavy burden on them. This needs to be a conversation. Is it happening, even from where you sit as an educationist?
It's happening.
It is?
It is happening. I have seen, even, let me just still go the private way. Like us at Zetech, we usually have a stakeholders meeting with our parents.
Right.
And when we started, they made a lot of noise. I don't have to attend a university school meeting. I attended a primary school meeting. And it is already happening. In many other primary schools that I go, they usually call us, tell us to talk to the parents and explain to them. The teacher is not telling you to do the mathematics for the child. They're telling you to enable, provide the resources, provide a conducive environment, and provide the time. It is already happening, but now it needs to be part of the school calendar, that there will be mentorship for the parents. And it's not just the schools, even churches have a role to play. Media has a role to play in educating the parents on how to get involved in their children's education.
I hear you. We have 5 minutes to exit this space, Professor, but I wouldn't want us to do that without talking about what was mentioned by the President. That is collapsing of HELB and TVET funding into one fund. And you realize also that we had gotten to a point whereby even students in private institutions were being funded by this HELB loan. As an educator, someone from the academic space or scope, how are you looking at this idea that is being mulled by the state?
Doreen, I look at international best practices because Kenya is quite developed, and I don't believe we are a least developed nation. We are a developing nation, just like any other country, because everybody is growing. I just go by one mantra: money should follow the child.
Money should follow the child.
Money should follow the child.
But look at what the President said, so that we can be able to actually see who deserves it. Because you see, the whole idea was that we just fund, much as even you'll go to public institution, but maybe your parent is capable. Then you realize you'll be funding everyone with the amount that is given for capitation, and there's this child who's very needy, whom we could have actually otherwise directed the whole funding. So then it's good, money follows the child. But how do we draw the line?
The child who needs the money. Money should follow the child, because you've had a debate, and I am also a true believer in the same. Because like now, I have seen the fee structure for national schools, 53,000 per year, and a parent can pay comfortably. Why is it that now when they go to the university, they cannot pay 40,000? Does that mean that the child is now out of the league? So we need to find a mechanism of where we actually fund the children who need the money.
So this collapsing is good?
This collapsing is good.
Okay.
But we also need to look at the disciplines that we need to fund, where we don't have enough staffing, so that we are actually looking at the national goals, the national priorities, so that we actually put money where it is actually going to be needed. So I am a strong believer that if a parent can pay, let them pay.
Good. So I'm seeing you agreeing with the present proposal.
Yes.
That if indeed, because the whole idea was that if a parent can pay, let them pay. So then we don't say that we just fund public institutions, but then there's a child X from family X, much as in a public institution, but they can be well funded while learning there. So then also, as we conclude, Professor, how do we move from the mentality of just having or being in an education system, whether the former or what is CBC, with the idea of in this learning institution with the whole mindset of getting a job, being employed? How do we move our mental capacity from that state?
I talked earlier about 21st century skills, and I think that's what they're meant to do, to prepare the child to work. You know, when you say work, people think it is manual. We prepare them to work. As self-employed, you work. As employed, you also work. So we need to prepare our children through entrepreneurship skills and hands-on skills, and show them that when they leave the job market, the university, they will not be going to look for jobs. They will be solution providers. They are going out there to find out exactly what's happening. And for us, the way we treat it, we look at it from the internship level. When the student is still at the university, we take them to the industry and we tell them, go and find out the problems that are facing KBC, for example, and give us a solution. So that by the time that child is leaving the university, the student is leaving the university, they know what they can actually be able to create a niche for themselves. So it's a mindset change that we need to take. Yes.
This mindset change, where does it need to be? Where does it need to start from? As early as toddlers, primary school?
I would say that early. Let me tell you, the 3-year-old goes to with the mom to the shop. And when the mom is selling, they sell with them. What does that tell you? That kid can already start seeing entrepreneurship skills. A 5-year-old goes with their father to who is a medic, and sees how the parent is treating the patient and how they are reacting to stuff like that. Already, this kid knows that you can actually create something for themselves. So you don't keep on telling them, so many vijana mwisho wa kusoma mtapata kazi nzuri sana. Yes, you can be the one to create that job. So it starts very early at the inception. You see what the Chinese and the Indians do? You start going to the shop with your mother, and they start preparing you to run the family business. So that's that's the culture we need to do. And we used to have it. The apprenticeship system in the old African society. If your father was dealing with herbs and medicine and stuff like that, he would carry you along with him. You carry the stool for him, and you learn how to do that. It is something we have to go back to and start preparing our kids to be solution providers rather than waiting and giving their CVs door to door. Yeah. Yes.
And just to talk about the Chinese and Indians, this just reminds me that sometimes you'd even realize, even if you're a doctor, you must be handling some family business somehow, somewhere.
Exactly.
Because you've learned about it over time.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your time.
Thank
Definitely
you.
appreciate your valuable inputs into the state of education in the country, and just what more we need to be doing to at least make sure we get there. We stop complaining and talking about the challenges, but we actually do get there.
Yes.
Definitely appreciate it.
Yes.
I have been speaking to Professor Alice Njuguna, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academics Research and Student Affairs, Zetech University. Of course, what has formed center of our conversation is looking at the state of education in the country and just what we can do to seal and break the loopholes that still exist. Also, it's a good place for me to remind you what we are following up for you. That is the state of the region address by IGAD, and of course at 10 when we get that link from the secretary, that is Dr. Wagner, the address, we shall definitely be heading over there to just give you bits and pieces of how that will be unfolding. And also what we know is that leaders from these 8 member countries are present. The representative ambassadors are equally present in Mombasa County. That is White Sands Hotel in Mombasa, where this event is taking place. Good place to end this conversation. And ultimately, good morning, Kenya. I'm Doreen Okello on behalf of the entire team. Asante sana. Till tomorrow, good morning.
And low salaries. For today's Focus Report, Clovis